Time now for another instant analysis with our insiders, Elliotte, Friedman, and Chris Johnston. Gentlemen, some news on Friday and not great news. Reports coming out that some players and some staff members on an NHL team tested positive for COVID. Elliotte, start with you. Fill in the blanks.
Basically, David, what happened is that it's believed that 5 members of the Tampa Bay Lightning, 3 players and 2 staffers, had positive tests. And from what I understand, it happened quick. Like it went from one day where there wasn't much until another day when all of a sudden they had a bigger number. So basically what they've done is they've shut down the facility temporarily, and they're starting to determine, and they're going to test quite a bit today, tomorrow, throughout the weekend, just to try to figure out exactly what they have here. How many cases are there? Are any of them false positives? All of that. So they're going to take the next 48, 72 hours, whatever it is, to try to really figure out what exactly they're dealing with here, the number, symptomatic, all of that stuff. So, in the moment, you're sitting here, and we also heard that the Philadelphia Phillies, who are just down the road in Clearwater, they had 8 tests. We've seen what happened with the University of Texas football team. They had 13 positive tests. You're hearing about positive spikes all over Arizona and Florida, where a number of NHLers live and train, and there are teams. And I think everybody's just trying to get an idea of what's going on here and how big this really is or isn't.
Well, and not to diminish certainly the significance here, because obviously this virus is a serious thing, as we've all come to know about. But, I do think that this was expected, or this kind of thing was expected to a degree, especially at a period right now. Remember, we're in the voluntary stage called phase 2, in which players are going into team facilities. They're getting daily temperature checks when they do so. Twice a week at least, they're getting nasal swab tests. But, outside of that time, players and staff are free to live their lives in any way they so choose. And so it's not what we would call a bubble or lockdown type of situation. I think this is one reason why, when finally the NHL and NHL Players Association finalized the protocols around training camp, which is phase 3, and the competition stage, phase 4, you're going to see much more significant clampdowns on freedom of movement and the types of things people can do, because obviously it just takes one person to spread this around. And so, I know it doesn't sound good. Again, I'm really not minimizing for any of the individuals that have had this affect them. But, I do think that the NHL has some confidence as they get further into this and they finalize those protocols, that there's a way still to proceed with competition in a safe manner once you get a little bit more of a clampdown around the situation.
David, we had a guest on the 31 Thoughts podcast this week. His name is Zachary Benny, and he has expertise in this. And one of the things he talked about was, even before you're required to quarantine, maybe if you're an athlete, especially in a high area like Florida or Arizona, you should consider quarantining. And I do wonder if that's going to become something that the league and the players talk about, saying to players, yes, you have the freedom of movement, but if you really want to play here and you really want to get this season going, you're probably going to have to be a lot more careful about where you go.
Well, the countdown's on. Listen, we're just a few weeks away from that July 10th initial start of phase 3. At least that's what's been expected, to have the sort of mandatory training camps for the 24 playoff teams before the resumption of the NHL season. Guys, look, we're at the mercy of a global pandemic. Every day we get new reminders of that, and certainly in a whole number of states, and you guys listed a few: Arizona, Texas, California, etc. Florida, we're seeing these incredible spikes right now. CJ, does this point more towards the hub cities possibly ending up in Canada, 1 if not 2, simply because there's fewer numbers of cases per capita in Canada than in the United States?
Well, there certainly is now at least a conversation or a thought that you might see 2 Canadian hub cities, which is not something I would have thought was going to happen even as recently as a week or 2 ago. That's not to say it's going to happen. I think Vegas has still remained a favorite of the NHL right from the start of this till now. But, this is the reason the league has waited, I think, before declaring once and for all where it's going, is to have as much information as possible available to it. And while Nevada hasn't spiked at the levels that you've seen in Texas, Arizona, and Florida, they have recorded in that state some of their highest rates in the last few days. And so, I do think that there is a world where maybe you do see 2 Canadian hub cities. Don't want to speculate too much there, but it certainly in play at this point in time, because especially in Alberta, there's very little caseload there. Same with BC, and Vancouver is one of the 3 cities being considered among Canadian candidates, along with Toronto and Edmonton. And so, I think we could end up there because the league is expected to finalize these decisions in the very near future.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And again, we do expect a decision from the National Hockey League, perhaps even as early as next Friday, which would be the NHL draft lottery. So we could have these answers sooner than later. The next 2 weeks, there's so much going on. Put into perspective, Elliotte, how important these next 2 weeks are, and walk us through what is happening throughout the league and the PA.
David, there's an incredible amount of work being done. Like while you're lounging around in your backyard drinking pina coladas, the lawyers for both the league and the players are grinding away at the protocols and the CBA. And they don't want to vote on the protocols for training camps and then games. They want to do it all at once. The CBA, the whole thing won't get done. There'll be like a framework or a memorandum of understanding. They're trying to work that to get done. If you want all the players to be in their camps by July 10th, you can't be voting on July 7th, for argument's sake. So they want to have a vote, and I think what they want to do is have one big vote on everything, because they believe the protocols and the CBA are tied in to each other. So I think they're working to have a vote by the end of June. And David, I think every player is going to have a vote. This isn't going to be up to the executive board. It's a CBA issue, so every player is going to have a vote. That takes time to do too. So I think these next couple of weeks are going to be critical in terms of getting all of the legwork done, so we can see, Chris, where the players' heads truly are.
Well, and I don't think we'll see the summer tournament restarted at all unless the players feel as though the framework of that CBA extension is completed. I mean, a lot of players are wanting to know what exactly this means financially for them, both in the short term, what can be won back, if we want to call it that, this summer, but also in the next couple of years, because, this is such an unprecedented scenario, and it's going to have some real financial ramifications on both sides of the table with the owners and the players here. I think a lot of work has been done. I'm pretty confident there's going to be something for them to vote on. I can't tell you which way it's going to go, but it does seem as though, one thing I think that the league and the players in this case deserve a lot of credit for is right from the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, putting the sport on hold, as there was a recognition, this wasn't us against them. It's these two sides trying to deal with circumstances that, until a few months ago, nobody could have imagined, and that they've, long identified the only way out of it, or the best way out of it, is by working together as well as they possibly can.
Guys, I think it's fair to say there's been cautious optimism about the resumption of the NHL season. On Friday, here we are, not great news coming out. And Elliotte, you just pointed out a ton of work still to be done. So, if you're on that spectrum and fans want to know, should they be getting hyped up, getting ready, or should they prepare themselves for a possible disappointment? Let me ask you guys point blank, a yes or no. Do you assume we're still going to be able to move forward and have a resumption to this NHL season?
Dave, the only reason I don't think that question is fair is because what's true today is not necessarily true tomorrow. I think if they work out, like, I'll tell you this, as a human being, if I knew I was going into a bubble based on what I'm seeing in some of these communities around here, if I was concerned about my well-being, I'd probably rather be in the bubble. I think the biggest question is, do they come to agreement on the economic impact? I think what the players want to know is, if I'm going to take this risk, do I feel the benefits are worth it? And I think if the answer to the question is yes, then I think we will play.
I'm not going to ride the fence as much, David. I'll say yes. Still very optimistic that they'll play. And the reason I say that is because we're seeing it done elsewhere. The soccer leagues have gotten going over in Europe, pro golf and NASCAR here in North America.
Yeah, but those guys, Chris, are actually following rules. Like, you look at some of these communities and people aren't following rules.
Right, but I think the players will follow rules. And I do think that there's a way, once you get everyone in that environment, that they'll make it happen. Look, I'm projecting too. I don't have all the information, and I'm certainly not an epidemiologist or an expert in this field, but I just sense a real willingness in the big picture from the league and both the Players Association to find solutions here. And I do think they'll find a way to finish off this season starting this summer.
Well, some great information. We'll keep our fingers crossed for everyone's safety first and foremost. And yeah, that would probably be a big part of if the NHL is indeed able to resume with the Stanley Cup playoffs sometime late July, early August. Thanks so much again to our insiders, Chris Johnston, Elliotte Friedman. Thanks, Jens. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Thank you.